Hello and welcome to Football League World TV. My name is Ned Holmes and I'm joined by my colleagues Adam Jones and Toby Wilding, and this is the debate show. Today we're talking about EFL managers under pressure. I've asked Adam and Toby to draft up a list of which managers they think are the most at risk of being sacked, and we're going to talk through the status of all of those. How are you doing this morning, Toby?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Despite last night's results and powering on through.
And what about you, Adam?
Hoping for a win against Blackpool tonight for Reading, but we'll wait and see. But I'm looking forward to this, actually. There's quite a few candidates that we could select throughout the EFL.
Absolutely. Well, before we get our teeth stuck into a few managers, just a reminder to head to the Football League World TV channel on YouTube and like and subscribe if you haven't already. And without any further ado, then we'll move to our first manager. Well, we're starting with someone that both of you have selected, and it's perhaps the top candidate on the list of the EFL managers that really could and should be worrying for their jobs. And that's Mick McCarthy. You know, a relatively strong start in the very early weeks of the season. And since things have fallen apart, they've lost 6 on the bounce, that they're sort of teetering above the drop zone now. I'll come to you first, Adam. He's obviously an experienced head, somewhat the sort of coach that some might argue is a good person to have in a relegation battle. Why does he sort of top your list?
I can't look past anything else other than the 5 centre-backs. I mean, you're playing 5 centre-backs at the same time. There's nothing really going forward. I mean, Kiefer Moore, he's not getting the very best out of him when, we saw what he could do in the summer with Wales. He's just not the same man as well. I watched him the other week and he just looked like a frustrated figure. He looked isolated up there. And I was watching actually the Cardiff versus Reading game, and I wasn't overly impressed with Cardiff, even though they dominated. And Cardiff fans seem to be quite reasonably happy kind of with the performance, obviously not with the result. And I guess that just shows how low standards have dropped really at the Cardiff City Stadium. And it's a shame because they looked quite good, especially when McCarthy first came in as manager, 11 games unbeaten. But 6 straight defeats, conceding 15 in that run, scoring just once. And that was kind of against Blackburn where they got hammered. I mean, it's just looking awful for him at the moment. They've got a tough 2 fixtures coming up. I know that he's going to get the games there to prove himself. But Fulham and Middlesbrough, I think his time will come to an end probably at the end of the week.
Absolutely, and shifting over to you, Toby. Really, I mean, as Adam touched on there, a really dreadful run. 15 conceded, 1 scored, and it's not really just about those results. As bad as that run is, there's been a little bit of a lack of ideas, and that strong and structured defence that I guess we associate with Mick McCarthy a lot of the time and he seems to bring in and have early success with, has seen lost recently. Are you surprised that we haven't seen him sacked already, particularly after that South Wales derby?
Yeah, I think definitely I'm surprised he's not gone yet. I mean, I think there was maybe a bit of talk sort of after the Reading game that based on the improvement of the performance that maybe that had bought him a little bit more time over the international break to maybe try and sort of rectify it in that couple of weeks where they didn't have to worry about playing a game or whatever. But then I watched them against Swansea on Sunday, and there was nothing there to suggest that they're built on any sort of performance. I mean, going forward, they were virtually non-existent, and defensively, Swansea just absolutely took them apart. And in so many ways, that's a bad sign for McCarthy and Cardiff. I mean, obviously, it's a local derby. You want a lot more from your side in that, but also you look at where Swansea were going into that game, they were only ahead of Cardiff on goal difference towards the wrong end of the table. And yet there just was such a big gulfing class there. There were just so many bad omens from that game for McCarthy. And then you look at that run ahead, obviously, as Adam was saying there, with Fulham and Middlesbrough to come. And then even beyond that, you've got the likes of Stoke, QPR in the playoff picture. Huddersfield there, not far either. So it's just a tricky run, and that Swansea game, given where they were now compared to what they've got coming up, was almost an opportunity that they've missed, you could argue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was a sort of performance that you'd imagine it's quite hard to bounce back from. Well, that's the first one, and the next man we're going to talk about is another Championship boss. Mick McCarthy obviously took charge sort of midway through last season, but Marcus Shott arrived at Barnsley in the summer. Perhaps something of a poisoned chalice following Valérien Ismaël after that strong start to his tenure, the playoff run, of course. Toby, Marcus Shott, why do you think he should be concerned about losing his job?
Well, I think sort of maybe even the thing that puts him perhaps under slightly more pressure for McCarthy than McCarthy for me is the fact that he doesn't sort of have that credit in the bank almost from last season. I mean, it's been a really poor start for Barnsley, and I think obviously the last couple of managers have lost, Gerhard Struber and Valérien Ismaël. It's hard to compare to them because they left for other jobs. So you're looking back to Daniel Stendel at the start of the 2019-20 season. Barnsley sacked him with 6 points from 11 games. Shop at the minute has got 8 from 12. So there's not a lot of difference there. They're in the relegation zone. It was always going to be a bit of a risk going down that foreign manager route. Again, you're never quite sure how that's going to work. And I mean, you sort of, some people do point to sort of the players that lost, Alex Mowatt and Daryl DK from last season. But I think it's worth remembering that Barnsley actually only brought DK in January. So even before then, Ismaël was working wonders with them. And they've still got a lot of quality players in that squad. Coley Woodrow, Hellick, Britton, Stiles, Freezer. There's good players in that squad who should have them higher up the league than they are. So I think given all that, there's got to be questions asked about Shop sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. You know, I think as you say, that there's a lot of players in that Barnsley squad that other Championship managers would kind of wish were playing for them, really. And you only have to sort of take a look on social media to see the sort of stance of a lot of Barnsley fans at the moment. They seem to have turned on the Austrian coach. Adam, following Valérien Ismaël, as we said, never going to be an easy job given the sort of fairy tale run to the playoffs last season. Do you feel sort of sympathy for Marcus Shott?
I do, and I'm going to go on the same lines as kind of Toby did in terms of losing Daryl DK and Alex Mowatt, especially to lose Alex Mowatt on a free transfer. I mean, that must have been absolutely gutting, and you know, losing Ismaël and Mowatt probably in, I think it was something like a week. I'm also sympathetic to his cause because he hasn't had the likes of Mads Andersen and Carlton Morris kind of at his disposal, which I think those two would kind of make quite a bit of a difference for the Tykes. But overall, I mean, you know, they're a shadow of those, you know, kind of them former selves. You know, no one was expecting really a playoff finish after last season. I think, you know, Ismaël kind of worked his magic and got the very best out of them. But they were kind of aiming for a respectable finish at least. There seemed to be promising noises coming out of Oakwell in pre-season. They appointed a successor for Ismaël in the shop quite quickly. Players seem to be enjoying pre-season, but you know, there doesn't seem to be any method to the madness. You know, the system just doesn't make sense. And I watched them on Saturday afternoon. I think that's probably one of their better performances of the season. But they just didn't take their chances. And a good Championship side, and I put, you know, quote words good, I think they would win at the Select Car Leasing Stadium on Saturday, but they just didn't have the firepower to do it. I know the goalkeeper player played well, but they didn't make the most of their chances, and it kind of just sums up their season, really. You know, sloppy bit of defending for the goal, and yeah, that's why I can only have a certain amount of sympathy for Shop.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting one, Toby, really, when you consider that obviously you were talking about Daniel Stendel. Dane Murphy obviously has left Barnsley, gone to Nottingham Forest. So you know, we don't really know, I guess, whether well, it's not the same man in charge, is what I'm trying to say. Whether it's not like it's the same guy ready to pull that trigger. Tonight's game against Bowyer, do you see that as potentially Shop's last if he can't get a result?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, like I say, I think the fans have already made clear their feelings on it about so perhaps this being the time for a change. And I mean, you look at it; they've got sort of Sheffield United, Bristol City, Derby to come. It's an interesting run of fixtures, really. There's opportunities there for them, maybe, but it's whether or not they can start taking them quickly. And I think even if Middlesbrough isn't Shop's last fixture, if the games that follow that, if they don't start picking up points soon, then they risk getting cut adrift because it's those sort of sides not that far ahead of them or even around them in the case of, say, Derby, and then Hull after that they're playing. So if they're missing out on points against those sort of sides, then they're going to get they're at risk of getting cut adrift quite quickly in the next sort of few weeks, and that would surely have to prompt a change.
Absolutely. Well, next we'll move to a man that we could even see go today if reports are to be believed. That's Charlton's Nigel Adkins, rather. As reports today suggested that owner Thomas Adkins met with the technical director and the CEO last night at the Valley in a meeting that Adkins was not present at. Toby, he's someone you picked on your list. Why'd you pick him?
Quite simply that form. I mean, it's so far below what I think anyone expected from Charlton this season. I mean, they were sort of just within touching distance of the playoffs last season, I think. And if you look at the sort of the expectations of a club at that size, they're really below par. And I mean, it's not just sort of the run they're on and the position they're in. It's some of the teams that they've been losing to, the nature of some of those defeats. It just they don't seem to be able to find a way to win. And when you've got the sort of squad that they have, because they in the end there was quite a bit of investment, and whether Charlton fans will have been entirely happy or not, that's how Adkins, you imagine, chose to recruit, and he's now not sort of getting the best out of these players. So I mean, I do have sympathy for Adkins. He seems a nice and really genuine bloke, but ultimately football's a results business, and they're not coming for Charlton at the minute.
Absolutely, and that's another one we talked about with Shott. You know, you only had to look at some of the videos that were coming out of the Valley rather recently at the boos that are ringing round there. He really seems to have lost the fan base. Toby, from your perspective, you know, it's obviously never nice to see a manager sacked. As you said, Nigel Adkins seems like a really great guy. There's a lot of mental health and stuff like that. But do you think it's a good idea for Charlton to look to pull the trigger soon, because that could mean that they would still have, a chance to get back in the race for promotion?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Thomas Sandgaard, the Charlton owner, ever since he's taken over, he's sort of tried to give this sort of image of him being a Charlton fan, one of the supporters almost. So, and obviously we've sort of heard that he was there last night. And I think if that is the case, then I think he's going to have heard in pretty much clear terms what the Charlton supporters want. So you imagine that's got to put a huge amount of pressure on Adkins. And as you say, Charlton are expected to push for promotion this season. And if they can find something to turn things around quickly, then there's still more than enough time in the season for them to do that. So you've got to feel that that's playing on Sandgaard's mind as well. And for that reason, I mean, I wouldn't be very surprised to see him go sooner rather than later, especially when you look at who they've got coming up next on Saturday as well. That's Sunderland at the Stadium of Light. They're absolutely flying, not least at home. And if they sort of do what they can do to teams, they've been hitting some big scores up there recently. And if they do that to Charlton, it's really going to be hard, even if Adkins does get that far, to see him going beyond that.
Absolutely. Well, time will tell whether Thomas Sandgaard is going to drop the hammer soon. But our next selection, and your final one of today, Adam, is one that will be a familiar face to fans at the Valley. Well, this is one that might surprise a few people, given the first few weeks of the campaign. But Adam, who's your final pick, and why is he on your list?
It's Lee Bowyer, and I feel absolutely terrible for picking him, because I think his sacking in the next 1 or 2 games would sum up the short-term nature of football nowadays, and I dislike it intensely. But I mean, the record kind of speaks for itself at the moment. No winning 6, scoring once, heavy defeats against the likes of Fulham, Peterborough, Nottingham Forest, with heavy defeats, at St Andrews against, the likes of the Cottagers and Forest. So I think a sacking might be closer than many people expect. I know that the Blues persisted with Aitor Karanka last season, for quite a while. I think it was until March, and then they kind of pulled the trigger. And I think they might not kind of wait as long this time. But the winless run, like regardless, can't continue. I think they're in fourth after their 2-0 win against Derby County. Dropped down to, I think, 19th now, obviously with the game in hand tonight, which they'll be hoping to win, but against Huddersfield side, who knows? I mean, they're not going to be favourites on paper for that one. And you also have to say that Bowyer at the moment, with the scoring record, isn't getting the most out of the likes of, his strike force. Troy Deeney, I know that he's had a tough start, so you can kind of forgive that. Chuck Zanike, who he's worked with before at Charlton Athletic at the Valley, who was actually quite effective for Charlton last season. You've got Scott Hogan, Lewis Jukovic as well, 2 experienced championship options in there, and they should be doing a whole lot better than they are right now. The one saving grace is the fact that they've just had the international break, and I think they responded okay against West Bromwich Albion. So I think, I don't think he's in like that much danger kind of in the next 1 game or 2 games, but I think, in the next 5 maybe. But yeah, I think, the international break will have helped to get his ideas across, and he said that he needed that international break to kind of, reassess his squad, and I think it was much needed. I agree with him on that one.
Certainly, you do wonder should that sort of barren and winless run continue, whether a Birmingham ownership that were patient with Karanka but have certainly not been afraid to pull the trigger in the past might make a decision. Adam, Lee Bowyer's last season in the Championship, I guess in some ways followed a similar run in that Charlton started that season really well. They were up there and amidst the sort of promotion pushes, and then it fell away. Do you think that's something that might be slightly in the minds of the Birmingham ownership?
I think so, yeah. But I think there's also something to balance that out, and I think that's the fact that he's enjoyed a good start to his tenure. I mean, barring the last couple of games of the 2020-21 season where he gave some of the youngsters a go, but he enjoyed a good start to his tenure. Unfortunately, at the expense of me, absolutely ruined my 21st birthday on the 17th of March against Reading. But no, I mean, that's something that will be in the back of their mind. Obviously, the relegation on his CV shouldn't be a stigma, but of course, it's always going to be when he's got it on his CV. Yeah. But yeah, I think that will obviously play in their mind. But I think, like Mick McCarthy, I think he had a bit of credit kind of in the bank from his early season spell with Birmingham City, as I said, 4th after a 2-0 win against a really difficult Derby County side. So he's shown that he can succeed, I think, at St Andrews. And obviously he's got the likes of Chong and Deeney to get him out of trouble, which may also save him. But he's got to start picking up results sooner rather than later. Otherwise, he's going to find himself in a bit of bother.
Absolutely. Toby, just coming to you sort of quickly, what have you made of Bowyer's recent struggles? And do you think he's the sort of manager that can sort of turn things around?
Yeah, it's interesting, really. Adam sort of said to us that he'd gone with Bowyer almost as a wild card. Funnily enough, I'd had him noted down on my list of potential nominations here as well. And I think if you look at what he did towards the back end of last season, he can definitely turn things around. If he can sort of find that formula again, I think sort of got to consider perhaps there's the issue of working a few players back up to fitness. I know, sort of speaking yesterday ahead of the Huddersfield game tonight, he sort of, it wasn't a great sort of prognosis for Birmingham on the injury front. So I think you do sometimes have to take that into consideration with a manager. When you look at the squad that he does have put together, you think if they can give him time to maybe get a few players back fit, then I do think Birmingham have the quality both on the pitch and in the dugout to turn things around again. I mean, the form they showed under him towards the end of last season was almost playoff form had it been over the course of a whole campaign. So, I mean, it would feel hasty perhaps for Bowyer to go at the minute, but you never know with Birmingham owners. But I think if they stick with him, I would be surprised if they were to slide back into real trouble.
Absolutely. Well, Lee Bowyer one then that I guess we can all agree maybe a little bit of pressure now and certainly will continue to build it if he can't right the current poor run. And finally, we're just going to run through a few more that I thought myself. Well, before we go to one or two that I was going to find out, Adam and Toby, we've had a comment in, and please do let us know your thoughts and sort of suggestions. Glenn Watkin from the Sky Blue Hub has said Bowyer seems a manager that can't stop a slide down the table, but I also think Mowbray at Blackburn could be under pressure if their winless run continues. This is something that we've spoken about a few times, Toby, off there. I was at the Kieran Prince Foundation Stadium yesterday. You know, it was Mowbray admitted he was sort of set up to sort of frustrate QPR rather than win the game. He's got a squad that, well, it's pretty inexperienced. So, Toby, what do you make of Mowbray's situation at the moment? And do you think he should be under any pressure?
I think that depends on whose perspective you're looking at that from. I think from the board's perspective and those who actually make decisions, my impression is no, I don't think he is under a great deal of pressure at this moment. I think obviously it's 1 point in 4 for Rovers now, in 4 games, that is. So yeah, that's below par. That's well short of what they would have expected. But you're looking back since they came up to the Championship, Mowbray's survived a lot worse runs than that. There was 1 win in 11 in 18-19. There was 1 win in 15 right at the back end of last season, when he sort of almost seemed to admit himself that perhaps he was a bit fortunate to stay in the job. Yeah. But so I think, given those sort of runs he came through, I'm not convinced that he's on at this moment is enough to put him under pressure from the board. But having said that, a lot of those games have been away. The one game in that run that has been at home was the Coventry game, when the Rovers were 2-0 up and blew that lead, drew 2-2 at full time. So it's going to be interesting because they're back at home on Saturday against Reading. Reading obviously in a bit of form, and if Reading can sort of capitalise on that, and if it does end up being another game where Rovers don't pick up a win, then given the crowd are back in, which wasn't the case during that 1 win in 15 towards the end of last season, then you imagine that he's going to sort of perhaps lead to a few more sort of boos and, you know, the cries for a departure. It wouldn't surprise me to hear them if it goes wrong for Rovers on Saturday, and whether that could maybe get through to the board, I don't know. But the other thing you've got to consider there is that Mowbray is now in the last year of his contract, and are Rovers really going to want to sort of pay him off when they could just let him leave when that expires at the end of the season. So there's a lot of variables in there, I think, to consider with Mowbray. But personally, it wouldn't surprise me to see him stay for the time being, but whether that's perhaps the right decision or not when they've been in this sort of situation so many times before is potentially a different matter.
Absolutely. Certainly going to be interesting to see what happens with Mowbray as we head towards the end of the season and the summer. Adam, another one I thought of is Danny Cowley at Portsmouth. Obviously a pretty difficult run recently. Looked as though that big victory against Sunderland in the rain might kickstart their season. It hasn't. What are your thoughts on his position?
Yeah, they can only play in the rain. I think that's it, to be honest with you. So, yeah, that's kind of my verdict on it. But last night was just terrible for them. I think their recent form and their recent run has been summed up really by the first goal last night. Obviously, Bond dispossessing Bazunu. Fantastic composure, but still a terrible error by the goalkeeper. Third goal from Aluko, you could argue that he should be saving that one as well. And you know, he's been really reliable in the early stages of the season, and recently he's not been as good. So yeah, that's not ideal really, and not a really good sign for Danny Cowley. I think the one saving grace for them is the fact that they've got the likes of Marcus Harness and Ronan Curtis, who could both, I think, could ply their trade in the Championship. I think they could continue to be a threat. And I think that's kind of the only thing really at the moment which is kind of saving. Obviously, they've got Ryan Tunnicliffe in the middle, but yeah, it was really poor last night, and really bad atmosphere, especially against, you know, some of their, you know, old foes. Maybe not foe in terms of Chaplin, but in terms of Cook. You know, obviously 2 guys who have been at Portsmouth and have been at Fratton Park and obviously returned and kind of ruined their night really. So that can't have helped matters at a 4-0 loss. Obviously, being beaten heavily as well by Rotherham United. So it's not looking great for the Cowley brothers at the moment.
Absolutely not looking particularly good for them. I guess you'd say Kenny Jackett was someone that seemed his tenure at Portsmouth seemed to live on long beyond the Pompey fans wanted him. So I think we maybe would have to be a little bit patient with the Cowleys in Portsmouth. Finally, Toby, just another one from the Northwest for you. Frankie McAvoy at Preston. Is it too soon to talk of a change there?
Maybe ever so slightly. Not again, sort of similar to Bowyer. Maybe not too soon as you might think. I mean, in fairness to Preston and McAvoy, I think when you look at sort of the results that he produced towards the back end of last season when he came in as caretaker after Alex Neil's sacking, I don't think there was any sort of question about giving him the job. I think he'd more than earned that chance. They're a strange one, Preston, at the minute, because they're not necessarily losing a lot of games, but they're not winning either. It's only 2 wins in 12 this season, and I think what else has hindered Preston is sort of the lack of a striker brought in the summer transfer window. It looked as though they might have rectified that with the Connor Wickham signing, but he's now out injured until, well, goodness knows when, perhaps beyond the end of his short-term contract at Deepdale. So that sort of puts a lot of pressure on Emile Rees to get the goals. He started reasonably well, but given the fact that he never really was prolific last season, you wonder how long that's going to continue. So there's issues there for Preston. I think also sort of the other thing that won't have helped McAvoy is almost the comments made by Tom Barkeys early this week. I think I saw something about it. He was very almost damning of Preston's performances. He sort of seemed to suggest that if they don't pick up in some way, then they could end up in a relegation scrap this season. And I mean, for us watching on as fans or neutrals or whatever, then that's really good to see that sort of honesty for a player. But for a manager such as McAvoy, when you've got one of your sort of key most experienced players making them comments, you can't really get the feeling that that's going to help his own position.
Absolutely. Well, certainly another one to watch. And just before we wrap up, then we'll run through it. It was Mick McCarthy at Cardiff, Nigel Adkins at Charlton, Lee Bowyer at Birmingham, and Marcus Shott at Barnsley. Adam, Toby, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me on the debate this week. Remember, of course, to like and subscribe to Football League World TV on YouTube, and look out for the EFL Wednesday preview with Alfie Burns at 3:30 this afternoon. Thank you very much.